Imagine working your entire life, waking up early, rushing to a job you don't love, stressing over bills every single month, and still never becoming truly financially free. Now imagine someone telling you that everything you were taught about money might be completely backwards. What if going to school, getting good grades, and working hard isn't actually the path to wealth? And what if the rich are playing an entirely different game, one most people never even realize exists? That's exactly the idea behind one of the most life-changing personal finance books ever written, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And in the next few minutes, you'll understand why this book completely changed the way millions of people think about money, work, success, and freedom. So let's dive in. Robert Kiyosaki grew up with two father figures. One was his real father, highly educated, hardworking, respected by society, and financially struggling most of his life. This was his poor dad. The other was the father of his best friend, a man with little formal education but incredible financial intelligence, who eventually became extremely wealthy. This was his rich dad. Both men worked hard. Both wanted the best for their families. But their beliefs about money were completely opposite. And that contrast became the foundation of this entire book. Think about this for a second. Most people spend years learning math, science, history, and literature in school. But almost nobody is taught how money actually works. Nobody teaches us about assets. Nobody teaches us about taxes. Nobody teaches us about investing. Nobody teaches us how the wealthy build financial freedom. And this is exactly where the book becomes incredibly powerful.
Kiyosaki argues that the biggest problem isn't that people don't work hard. It's that they work hard without understanding the rules of money. The poor and middle class, according to him, spend their lives working for money. The rich learn how to make money work for them. That single idea changes everything. One of the most important concepts in the book is the difference between assets and liabilities. Simple words, massive impact. Kiyosaki says an asset puts money into your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. Sounds obvious, right? But most people completely misunderstand this. For example, many people think buying a huge, expensive house automatically makes them wealthy. But if that house constantly drains money through mortgage payments, repairs, taxes, insurance, and bills, then financially it may actually behave more like a liability. Meanwhile, an asset could be a rental property, a business, stocks, or something that generates income consistently. This is where most people get it wrong. They increase their lifestyle every time they make more money. Bigger car, bigger house, more expenses, more debt. And suddenly they become trapped in what Kiyosaki calls the rat race. Wake up, go to work, pay bills, repeat. For decades. The scary part? Many people never escape it. And the reason is fear. Fear of losing money, fear of failure, fear of uncertainty.
Rich Dad teaches Robert that fear controls most people's financial decisions. People stay in jobs they hate because they're afraid of instability. They avoid investing because they're scared of losing money. They never take risks because they want comfort and security. But according to the book, financial freedom only comes when you stop letting fear control your choices. Now, this doesn't mean being reckless. It means becoming financially educated. Because the rich don't necessarily take bigger risks. They simply understand money better. And this leads to another massive lesson from the book. Financial literacy is more important than a high income. You can earn $1 million a year and still end up broke. We've seen celebrities, athletes, and lottery winners lose everything. Why? Because making money and managing money are two completely different skills. Rich Dad constantly teaches Robert to understand accounting, investing, taxes, and business. Not because numbers are exciting, but because knowledge creates freedom. Most people never realize this until it's too late. They spend their best years chasing paychecks instead of building systems that create long-term wealth. And this is where Kiyosaki introduces another life-changing idea: the difference between employees and business owners. Employees trade time for money. If they stop working, the income stops. But business owners and investors build systems that continue generating income even when they're not actively working every hour. That's why the wealthy focus so heavily on ownership. Ownership of businesses, ownership of investments, ownership of assets. Think about companies like McDonald's. Most people think McDonald's is in the burger business, but Kiyosaki explains that they're actually heavily in the real estate business.
They own valuable land around the world. That's how wealthy people think differently. They look beneath the surface. They think long term. And they focus on acquiring assets that grow over time. Another powerful idea in the book is that schools prepare people to become employees, not entrepreneurs. Now, whether you agree completely or not, the point is incredibly interesting. Traditional education often teaches people how to work for someone else, follow instructions, get stable grades, find a secure job. But entrepreneurship requires a completely different mindset. Creativity, problem solving, leadership, risk-taking, sales, communication, financial intelligence. And Kiyosaki believes these skills are essential in the modern world. What if everything you believed about success was incomplete? That question sits at the heart of this entire book. One of the most emotional parts of the story is when Rich Dad tells young Robert that the poor and middle class often buy luxuries first, while the rich buy assets first. The rich delay pleasure.
They focus on building income-generating systems. Then, eventually, the assets pay for the luxuries. That's a completely different mindset. Imagine two people earning the same salary. One spends everything upgrading their lifestyle. The other invests consistently into assets. 10 years later, their lives could look completely different. One is trapped by expenses. The other owns freedom. And freedom is really the deeper message of this book. Not just money. Freedom. Freedom over your time. Freedom over your choices. Freedom from constant financial stress. Now, let's talk about another lesson that made this book incredibly controversial and incredibly famous. Kiyosaki says, "Don't work for money. Work to learn." That line changed the way many people approach their careers. Instead of choosing jobs only for salary, he suggests choosing opportunities that teach valuable skills. Sales, marketing, communication, management, negotiation, leadership. Because skills create opportunities, and opportunities create wealth. This is especially important in today's world. Technology changes rapidly. Industries evolve constantly. The people who survive and thrive are usually the ones who keep learning, not the ones who stay comfortable. And here's another powerful insight. Rich Dad teaches Robert that taxes often punish employees more heavily than business owners and investors. The wealthy understand legal systems, corporations, and financial structures better. Again, whether you agree with every argument or not, the core lesson is clear. Financial education matters. A lot. Now, it's important to understand something. This book isn't really about becoming rich overnight. It's about changing your mindset. Because before someone changes their financial future, they usually have to change the way they think. And that's why this book impacted millions of readers around the world. It challenged deeply rooted beliefs about work, security, and success. It forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. Am I building wealth or just surviving? Am I buying assets or liabilities? Am I learning financial skills or depending entirely on a paycheck? And this is exactly where the book becomes incredibly powerful. Because even if you never become a millionaire, the lessons can still completely change the way you handle money. For example, you might start tracking your expenses differently. You might invest more consistently. You might start a side business. You might focus on learning high-income skills. You might stop trying to look rich and start trying to actually become financially secure. Small mindset shifts create massive long-term changes.
Now, let's talk about some of the most memorable ideas from the book. One of the biggest is this: the rich don't work for money, meaning wealthy people focus on acquiring systems and assets that generate income.
Another powerful idea. Financial struggle is often the result of people working all their lives for someone else. This challenges the traditional belief that job security automatically creates freedom. And perhaps the most famous lesson of all? Mind your own business. Not gossip, not other people's lives. Your own financial business. Build assets, grow investments, increase financial intelligence. That's what Rich Dad means. And honestly, that advice is timeless. Because at the end of the day, money amplifies who you already are. If you lack discipline, more money won't magically fix that. If you avoid learning, more income won't save you. If you constantly chase status and appearances, wealth can disappear surprisingly fast. But if you become financially educated, disciplined, patient, and strategic, everything changes. That's the real transformation this book offers. Not just financial advice, a completely different lens for viewing life. By the end of the book, you realize something important. The goal isn't necessarily to become obsessed with money. The goal is to stop being controlled by money. There's a huge difference.
When you understand finances, you make decisions with confidence instead of fear. You stop living paycheck to paycheck mentally. You start thinking years ahead instead of week to week. You begin building freedom intentionally. And maybe that's why this book continues to inspire people decades after it was published. Because deep down, almost everyone wants the same thing: security, freedom, choices, a better future for themselves and their families. And Rich Dad, Poor Dad reminds us that achieving those things starts with education, mindset, and the courage to think differently from the crowd. So the next time you earn money, ask yourself one question. Is this money making my life richer temporarily? Or is it building long-term freedom? Because that single question can change your entire future. And maybe your entire life.